Thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring today's video. Nintendo always gives us more than one console per generation, and the Switch 2 is no exception. New features, improved designs, special editions, new colors, the list goes on. What I want to do is create the most accurate predictions of what the other Switch 2s are going to look like, so we can see exactly what to expect in the coming years. Starting with Special Editions. Special editions have existed for every handheld and console for a very long time now. In the 90s we got the translucent Game Boy Colors and N64s, arguably the coolest looking special editions of all time. In the early 2000s, we got a load of different GameCube colors, with some being super rare. In the late 2000s, we got game-themed DS's, colored Wii's, and even a solid gold Wii for Her Majesty the Queen. I want to steal this. For the 3DS era, we got a ton of cool ones like the Zelda and Smash Bros 3DS XLs, as well as a bunch of new 2DS XLs with textured backs, like the Minecraft and Pokemon editions. Most recently, we got special edition Switches, with notable ones like the Animal Crossing version, the Tears of the Kingdom edition, the limited edition Labo one that's just brown, and a whole load of special edition Joy-Cons that you can buy separately. So what are they going to do with the Switch 2? To start with, it's guaranteed that we're going to get some new color variants, since at the moment we only have one option, and almost every other Nintendo console came with at least two. But it might not be done in the way that you expect. You see, the default Switch 2 already comes with some inherent color on it, and this is going to stick with every new version of the console. This is because not only is it on the Joy-Cons, but it's also on the insides of the console itself, and on the insides of the grip. So, to make sure the rails still match with the console, we need to assume that these colors won't change either. This means that new color variants of the Switch 2 will probably look something like this, with an awesome two-tone design on the Joy-Cons. Taking this further, I think it's about time we bring back the translucent controllers. People have been begging for it, and it would be super cool to see the complex internals of the Joy-Con 2s. Let me know what you think of these, because I think they're sick. But this is just for new color variants. Where it really gets exciting is special editions. Metroid Prime 4 is kind of a big deal, and given the immense hype for the game, it would be perfect for a special edition Switch 2. It could look really slick with the game's purple and black color scheme, as well as the Metroid symbols and decals. This special edition may get bundled with the game, and come with the option to buy the Joy-Con 2s separately. Pokemon Legends ZA is also a big deal, and a special edition with the game included also makes a ton of sense. Something like this would be awesome. I'm assuming there's going to be some major 3D Mario game coming out at some point, and that's pretty easy to make. Just have a red body and dock, plus blue Joy-Cons, and a blue kickstand to represent Mario's overalls. Done! These look really cool, but they're not the main reason I was inspired to make this video. What the rest of this video is dedicated to is truly exciting. The first new update to the Nintendo Switch 2 will be the Switch 2 Lite. The original Switch Lite was actually very successful. The problem with making a hybrid console like the Switch is it's naturally always going to be better in handheld mode. It's console power on the go. Because of this, a lot of people I know only played in handheld mode. To add to this further, the handheld side of Nintendo's devices have always been their strong suit. While the GameCube and Wii U were getting decimated by their competitors, Nintendo always had their handhelds like the Game Boy Advance and 3DS selling incredibly well to fall back on. I mean, besides the Switch, their best-selling system is the DS, a handheld. Since a lot of people weren't even using the Switch 1 in TV mode, and given Nintendo's expertise in handheld devices, they made the logical decision to make a handheld-only Switch. This came with a bunch of benefits. To start with, they could redesign the Switch to be fully tailored for gaming on the go, and since it would have less features, they could sell it at a lower price. Roughly 2 years after the Switch 1 launched, rumors started surfacing about a potential Switch Mini in the works, which would be smaller and cheaper than the normal Switch. But it wasn't just rumors. We actually saw an image of the plastic shell of a factory prototype 3 months before the official announcement. At the time though, everyone thought the photo was totally fake, ridiculing anyone who believed in it. And to quote some random Redditor, there was an oracle in our midst, and we ignored him. What we ended up with was the Switch Lite, and it was pretty perfect. It had no detachable Joy-Cons because you don't need that in a handheld, and this allowed them to use an actual D-pad rather than 4 separate buttons, which a ton of people wanted. It was also much smaller with a 5.5-inch screen compared to the 6.2 of the Switch, making it way more portable and better suited for taking on the go. You'd think the battery life would be worse because it has to be smaller, but no, it was almost double that of the OG Switch, because they used a newer, more efficient chip. Altogether, the Switch Lite addressed a lot of people's needs, where they wanted a smaller, cheaper, more portable Switch. Can you see where I'm going with this? I already know a lot of Switch 2 owners who exclusively use it in handheld mode. Personally, I think this is kind of crazy given how much better the new dock is with 4K and a fan. But what do I know? It's not like I talk about Nintendo for a living. That being said, it just goes to show how good this system also is in handheld mode. Nintendo really cooked with both sides of this console. This alone already gives us reason to assume that Nintendo will probably make a Switch 2 Lite. But there's something else that's much more impactful. Right after the sponsor of today's video, War Thunder. War Thunder is the most in-depth vehicle combat game ever made, and it's completely free on PC, consoles, and even mobile. The amount of content is ridiculous. Over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships, from 1920s armored cars to modern stealth jets. War Thunder is super immersive, with incredible visuals, realistic sound effects, and a ton of attention to detail, making for an experience you truly get sunk into. My favorite part has to be the hyper-realistic vehicle damage, where every component is simulated rather than just some generic hitbox. With over 70 million players, War Thunder is one of the biggest games on the planet, packed with high quality content for military history fans. Grab War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and mobile using the links in the pinned comment or description. New players, and even returning ones who haven't played the game in 6 months on PC and consoles, can get a massive bonus pack with the exclusive Eagle of Valor decorator, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account. It's only available for a limited time, so you might as well click the link now. The price. Sorry for that jump scare for those who complain about the Switch 2's price, but while the Switch 2 is quite expensive, you're definitely getting your money's worth. That being said, many fans, kids, and families just won't be interested in such a substantial investment for something that they want to use casually. This is the key reason to make a Switch 2 Lite, to make it more accessible to the masses. Like the original Lite, it would be much smaller, which would lower the material costs. No detachable Joy-Cons makes the whole thing simpler to make too. Paired with less features like no dock support and less power because it won't need to play in 4K, I could see Nintendo cutting the price by $100 or $200. However, this leads to some issues. For one, while the Switch 2 has a lot of graphical performance in order to play games in 4K on a TV, it's the same power that allows you to play games in 120 FPS in handheld mode. If they were to use a less powerful chip, it may not be powerful enough for this capability. Therefore, if they were to go this route, they may reduce the refresh rate to only 60 FPS, in turn helping reduce the cost further. But who's to say Nintendo will even make another Lite? What's stopping them from making a brand new type of system that we've never seen before, but still satisfying the desire for a cheaper system? Allow me to introduce to you the Switch 2 Mini. This takes a lot of what went so well with the original Switch Lite, but builds on it in such meaningful ways that it feels more like a Switch 2 than just a new version of the Switch Lite. While I've clearly been praising this little guy quite a bit, it certainly wasn't perfect. Many people had issues with the system, even before it was announced. The biggest problem was that you couldn't connect it to a TV, at all. Many people really didn't like this, and to at least have the option would have been cool. Obviously, Nintendo didn't include a dock with the Lite to keep the price low. But what if they didn't have to? For the Switch Mini, let's say it can be played in any Switch 2 dock, you just have to buy one separately. This way it keeps the price low for those who only want to play in handheld anyway, and those who might want to connect it to a TV still have that option. Furthermore, this Mini wouldn't be the same size as the Lite. It's far too small at this point, especially when compared to the Switch 2. It makes it look too inferior. The original Switch 1 size would be perfect, actually. It's the same thickness as the Switch 2, so it would fit in the dock. It's a much more comfortable and manageable size than the Lite, and Nintendo could potentially use existing parts from the Switch 1, making it even cheaper to make. This, I believe, is the perfect balance for a smaller device that's still very capable. Obviously, it can't have detachable Joy-Con 2s because they'd be the wrong size for the smaller body, so having permanently attached controls is still a very smart choice. In a sense, this system is sort of like what the 2DS was to the 3DS. Back in the day, the 2DS was a way to play the brand new 3DS games, but with the old tech of the original DS at a cheaper price. So, what would this look like? Overall, it would likely look like a mix between the Switch 1, 2, and the Switch Lite. We can achieve this by using a Switch 1 body with non-detachable Joy-Cons and adding a D-pad on the left side. We can then tweak the body a bit to feature a smaller version of the Switch 2 screen, and make sure the bottom of the system allows it to connect to the Switch 2 dock. For an added bonus, I also included the Switch 2 kickstand, because it could be useful if you want the option for tabletop mode, For the price of the Switch Mini, it seems like around $300 would be pretty perfect. Now, I don't want to get too political, but it could get more expensive in the US if that whole tariff bullshit keeps happening. I don't know why I'm saluting, I'm not American. The Switch 2 OLED. This one's going to be pretty cool. OLED screens are rather magical. For those who don't know what it is, here's a quick rundown. Most screens work by having a layer of pixels that change color, but you can't see them properly unless it's lit from behind. This is why early screens on things like the Game Boy Advance were so hard to see unless you're in direct sunlight. To solve this, most screens have a thing called a backlight, a large panel behind the screen that lights up all of the pixels. The issue with this is that it's going to light up every pixel equally, even the ones that you want to be pure black. You can tell if your screen is like this if you display something black on it and it still glows. OLED screens improve on this, where instead of having a giant backlight for the screen, each tiny pixel has their own individual backlight. This allows for brighter brights, darker darks, and pure, inky blacks, making for a much better looking screen with even better colors too. Editor, put me on screen. Thanks. This technology is expensive though. That's why the original Switch OLED costs more than the regular Switch. The price jump will likely be even higher this time, for a few reasons that I'll get to. The Switch 2 OLED has been rumored for as long as the Switch 2. From very early on, we knew from leaks that the Switch 2 screen would be an 8-inch 1080p LCD. So technically, the colors wouldn't look as nice as an OLED. That being said, the Switch 2 screen is still really nice. Many people wanted the screen to be OLED right out of the gate, but many people are also super angry at the price of the Switch 2. Unfortunately, you can't have a Switch 2 that's OLED and decently affordable, which some people don't seem to realize. Also, this isn't the same situation as the Switch 1, where they can add an OLED screen for an extra $50. The technology that's needed to make a Switch 2 OLED with the same features as the Switch 2 screen is super expensive. Editor, put me in the gameplay. For starters, it needs to be 120Hz this time round. More expensive. It also needs to support HDR. Very expensive for OLEDs. And VRR. Even more expensive. But despite everything telling us that a Switch to OLED seems impossible, it isn't. What is this guy doing? You see, when the Switch 1 came out, giving it an OLED screen would also have been way too costly, but 4 years later, the tech became cheap enough to make a reasonably priced system. And I know the exact same thing is going to happen with the Switch 2. Display technology is one of the few things in the world that's gotten cheaper as it's gotten better over time. Back in the day, it cost you thousands to get an HD TV. Nowadays, you can get quadruple that resolution and a way bigger screen for a couple $100s. We can actually track the rate of improvement of OLED displays too. It used to cost a fortune to get a 4K OLED monitor, but over time they've been getting cheaper, with higher refresh rates and brightness. Exactly what we need for a Switch 2 OLED. Editor, put me in the Switch 2. Given enough time, an OLED panel that ticks all of the boxes will be possible. And even affordable. So a Switch 2 OLED is inevitable if Nintendo wants free money. But the Switch OLED wasn't just a better screen, it was a complete refresh for the system. The OG Switch already felt pretty dated back in 2017, and by 2021, it felt like a relic. So Nintendo used the OLED to bring the system into modern times. They did this by making it out of more premium materials like a metal body and an actual glass screen instead of plastic. They also improved on a bunch of things that people had issues with, the biggest of which being the kickstand. The Switch 1's kickstand is so shit, I could take a shit and it wouldn't be as shit as this shit. You couldn't change the angle, and the angle that it was stuck at was really inconvenient. Furthermore, it was super flimsy and would often just snap off. To fix this, Nintendo made a wide kickstand that could be used at any angle and made it out of steel so there was no way that it could break. They then carried this over to the Switch 2. Another thing they improved was the storage, doubling it over that of the Switch 1, as well as tweaking the dock so that it wouldn't scratch people's screens anymore, and they also added an Ethernet port to it. So, what could they improve on the Switch 2? What are some things that people have been having issues with? Well, there's no better place to start than the battery life. The Switch 2's battery life isn't bad, it just could be better. At the moment, you can get around 2 to 6.5 hours depending on the game you're playing, usually around 3. That's perfectly playable, and it's on par with the original Switch from 2017. However, every Switch 1 after the OG got about double that, even the Switch Lite. For the most part, this is due to a less power-hungry, but still just as capable chip. Switching to an OLED screen on its own will bring efficiency gains, since you don't have to backlight the whole screen at once. But for this concept, we're going to take it further and create a brand new chip. The Switch 2 comes with the NVIDIA T239 chip, based on an 8nm node, and is capable of all the fancy stuff like ray tracing and DLSS. Very high-tech stuff, but there's still a ton of room for improvement. For starters, Nintendo and NVIDIA made this chip all the way back in 2021, so the Switch 2 is already using 4-year-old chip technology. They can make some massive efficiency gains nowadays thanks to the node size getting even smaller. Chips are made of a ton of tiny switches known as transistors. If you can make these smaller, then you can fit more in the same area, increasing the power of the system. However, what we want to do is have the same graphical power but with smaller transistors, which would then use less energy and be more efficient. Exactly what they did last generation. Nowadays, we're not at 8nm, we're down to 3, and getting close to 2. Using something like this would greatly improve efficiency and thus make the battery life way better, with a bunch of other benefits like the console getting less hot, and not needing to use the fan as much. So that's the battery life sorted, but what other things do people want improved on the Switch 2? The storage. 256GB is plenty to start off with, and 8 times more than the OG Switch. However, games have also gotten bigger, and therefore will take up space even quicker. The standard for consoles these days is 1TB, but we're dealing with a handheld, and don't want to make it so expensive that people get all angry again. So let's bump our Switch OLED up to 512GB of storage. Of course, this can be upgraded with an SD card too. Another thing that's kind of disappointing is HDR on the Switch 2 screen. Remember how I said normal screens use one big backlight so the display is all roughly the same brightness? This makes the Switch 2 screen look quite flat and makes it very hard to get a dynamic range of brightnesses, a high dynamic range, if you will. OLED fixes this as each pixel can have its own brightness. You may have even seen this on your phone. Have you ever been scrolling Instagram Reels and come across a really bright video? That's in HDR. It's a bit much on Instagram, but you get the idea. True HDR would look incredible on the Switch 2 OLED, and probably make handheld the best way to play, as most TVs aren't OLED. Given that it only lights up the pixels in use, we could also use OLED tech to create a little info section on the part of the screen that's peeking up from the dock in TV mode. Things like battery levels, notifications, or messages from friends, if they ever add that to game chat. Finally, to make the design look fresh and new, I've made the Joy-Cons white while still keeping those colored accents because they look sick. So this is what the Switch 2 OLED will look like, but when will it come out? Just going off the timeline of the Switch 1, it would be safe to assume that it would release sometime in 2029. This also gives the chip and display technology time to catch up and get cheaper, so you don't have to sell a kidney to get the damn thing. As for the price, that's really hard to tell, but $500 seems reasonable, and $550 seems greedy, so let's go with that because it's Nintendo. Also, this can help account for inflation. Editor, show Nintendo inflation on screen. Wait, no! The family of systems we've made so far is already pretty great for a lot of people, but it looks very similar to the first gen Switch family. What if they made something entirely new? Something that people have been wanting for a very long time. The Switch 2 Pro. The Switch 2 is already incredibly capable, a bit more than 10 times more powerful than the original Switch. However, it's still less powerful than the PS5, and in a few years, it'll seem even less capable. Even now, games are pushing the hardware to its max limits, with titles like Cyberpunk 2077 running at only 1080p in 30 or 40 FPS. I know what you're thinking. This is Nintendo we're talking about. You don't buy a Nintendo console for the power. And you're right. Plus, it would be a whole ordeal to remake games halfway in the Switch 2's life, just to have better graphics and look more flashy. However, there's more to a Pro than just raw graphics power. For our Switch 2 Pro, it would make the most sense to just say you can play all the same games as the Switch 2, just twice as smoothly, essentially doubling the frame rate and maybe resolution while still playing the same games. This fixes the issue that a ton of games don't support 120 FPS in handheld mode at the moment because it's just too much to handle. We can get this done with a brand new chip, and it doesn't necessarily need a ton of extra raw power if it just uses Nvidia's newest DLSS technology. For example, it could use something called frame generation, which uses intelligence to generate a brand new frame in between existing ones to essentially double the frame rate without using that much horsepower. Newer upscaling models like DLSS 4 can also improve performance by rendering things at an even lower resolution and upscaling it with the same quality as before. These methods would be pretty cost effective and a substantial upgrade over the Switch 2. But where the Switch 2 Pro gets interesting is with what we can do to the hardware itself. For starters, it's going to use the same tech as the OLED, nicer screen, double the storage, etc. But everything else is going to be different, designed for pros. For the console's body, let's include 2 mics this time for better quality, especially when talking at a distance, and 2 game card slots at the top, so you don't have to switch out your cartridges as often. This could be done on the dock instead, but that limits it to being only a TV mode benefit. Speaking of the dock, let's say it can now output 4K at 120 FPS because the Switch 2 Pro can do double the frame rate, and let's also add a larger fan on the back for better cooling, as well as a higher wattage power supply to fast charge the system. This stuff's all decent and realistic, but nothing crazy so far. Now, we get to talk about my favorite part of this video, the Joy-Con Pros. What's the one thing that hardcore Switch users want when playing in handheld mode? Better grips. More specifically, larger grips with better ergonomics, like the ones found on devices like the Steam Deck. Except, Nintendo can't add something so clunky as would make the Switch 2 Pro less sleek and less portable. So, to combat this, I've designed some low-profile grips that are more comfortable than the normal Joy-Cons, yet still small enough to be easy to take on the go. Furthermore, they're much easier to hold when using mouse mode, something I guarantee hardcore users will seriously appreciate. As I was doing my research, I noticed there was this massive market for grips on the side of the handheld with these grip cases, and wondered if there was any way to implement this in the Pro too. It seemed impossible for me to do without keeping the whole thing slim. But then, I had an idea. Something that the Switch 2 does best. Magnets. This was the eureka moment I was hoping for. To achieve this vision, I've made the Joy-Con Pros out of coated stainless steel to feel more premium, kind of like Apple devices, or the back of the Switch OLED. And this allows you to attach optional magnetic grips to the sides if you want to. These detachable grips would be great because you don't have to use them if you don't want to, and they're super easy to attach if you do. With magnetically attaching grips, it could also allow you to snap the Joy-Con Pros together without that plastic grip thing and make a full controller that way. But that's not all we're adding to the Joy-Con Pros. Nintendo has already made a controller for hardcore gamers, the Switch 2 Pro controller, and it already comes with a plethora of innovations itself. We'll use its design language with grey parts under the sticks and on the top, so it matches the Pro aesthetic that they're going for. The Pro controller too also has cool tech that wasn't included in the regular Joy-Con 2s, like bigger and better buttons that are squishy and more comfortable to press. On top of that, it has the best joysticks I have ever felt on any controller, ever. Truly, I think this is the best controller that I've ever used, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a Nintendo channel. So let's replace those low profile sticks from the Joy-Con with the smooth gliding ones from the Pro controllers, and add the bigger and better buttons too. You may think that we should add analog triggers to the Joy-Con Pros, but you'd be wrong. Turns out, Nintendo actively chooses to not add these to their controllers for a few reasons, and I have to say, I actually agree with them. Aside from racing games where you might want to pull harder to go faster, there really isn't any benefit to triggers with a loss of travel. They're less tactile and therefore feel less responsive, and you also have to pull them in a bit before they activate, meaning there's a bit of delay before it even registers an input. Furthermore, it's just too late in the generation to add these, and game developers would have to retroactively add support for them. Not ideal. The final thing for the Joy-Con Pros, GL and GR buttons. The back buttons are genuinely so useful on the Pro controller too, that it only makes sense to add them to a Pro version of the Joy-Cons. For the icing on the cake, we can make the Joy-Con Pros compatible with the regular Switch 2, so you can buy them separately and still use them if you want, without having to upgrade your whole console. Something like this would likely cost around $100 though. As for when Nintendo could release the Switch 2 Pro, it would certainly be after the Switch 2 OLED, because that way you get people upgrading to the OLED and then upgrading to the Pro, and that's easy money for them. For the price of the console, let's say $600. We've got to be realistic, but I can't bear to see anything higher than that. So there we have it, a complete lineup of the Switch 2 family of systems, with multiple variations to make sure that we tick every box, and versions that satisfy every person's requirements. This took a lot of work to produce, and there are more bangers like this to come, so consider subscribing, it's good for both of us. Once again, a big thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring today's video. Go play the game for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox or mobile, and use my links in the description and pinned comment to get a massive bonus pack with an exclusive vehicle decorator, as well as multiple premium vehicles. New players, and even returning ones who haven't played the game in the last 6 months can get this. And if you're still craving something else to watch, this Nintendo Switch retrospective is one of my favorite videos. Thanks for watching, and thanks to my channel members and patrons.